Hello and welcome. My name is Marcin Łukasik. Welcome to our webinar. Today we'll guide you through the seamless migration from Ubuntu to Azure Linux worker nodes in AKS made effortlessly with CloudCasa. We will tell you the why in regards to benefits of Azure Linux and of course the how. And by saying we, I mean myself and my colleague, Field CTO for Catalogic and CloudCasa. Martin Fan, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Marcin.
Pleasure is all mine. Before we dive in, let me remind you that this is Ask Me Anything webinar, so please post your questions in the chat area. Martin, how about we start with why? Why do we even want to talk about migration to Azure Linux in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, as most of you on the phone probably are aware, Microsoft has different distributions for Linux to deploy Kubernetes, their Kubernetes services on their AKS clusters,
Right.
if you will. This all started with, their shift in preference from canonical Ubuntu to distribution that they refer to as Azure Linux, right? So it's just a distribution that they have more control over in terms of development, security, updates, et cetera. So there's been an initiative and incentive to help customers migrate from canonical Ubuntu or clusters running in AKS from canonical Ubuntu to Azure Linux, and also migrate those persistent volumes as well, and as well as the entire application. So this is something that is built into CloudCasa, or now built into CloudCasa, I should say. But CloudCasa has been around, for almost 4 years now at this point. So we had a backup and recovery application that we've been using to help users provide data protection for their persistent volume data in Kubernetes. So it just took a few additional tweaks to kind of point to the new levers that we need to turn for helping with this migration within Microsoft. And here we are now, having a solution or an easy button to help those users migrate from Ubuntu to Azure Linux.
And we are gonna talk about surely about that easy button later on. But before we go there, could you give me a brief overview of Azure Linux? Because probably people who join us today might be wondering, why would I even do that, right? Why Azure Linux? Are there any benefits? Are there any pros for going to Azure Linux?
Yeah, I mean, I really can't speak on Microsoft's behalf, but from my experience as kind of an end user looking on the outside in, I think it's just a matter of maintaining or having maintenance over the distribution themselves, right? So
Right.
Azure Linux is just something that Microsoft is able to control, and even from an end user perspective, I think a lot of users on the phone might not even know kind of the distribution that they're running. They just go ahead, deploy the cluster, or click on the cluster deploy button, and they're just running their application in the cloud, right? So but from a technical perspective, I want to be able to provide updates, keep the container and applications and operating systems secure. Having to rely upon a third party to provide those updates to the distribution, it was just something that Microsoft, I think, felt they could move a lot faster by adopting their own distribution.
Right. And I believe that on the list, there are only pros for going to Azure Linux, but I believe that there are also some hardships along the way. And the question is, does Cloud Casa can help overcome those hurdles or challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me I share my screen here. I have a diagram
Sure.
of the overall solution architecture, but I think I'm actually sharing it out now. But for those of you on the phone that are not familiar with Cloud Casa, this is our software as a service for Kubernetes data protection application. So when we designed Cloud Casa, a number of years ago, the data protection, we as a data protection company wanted to provide these software services to users, uh, wanting to protect their Kubernetes applications. Now, we've been in the business of data protection for almost 3 decades now, but we knew that once Kubernetes came out and this whole concept of containerization and persistent volume, that basically changed the data protection landscape in the sense that we need to develop something new that was complementary and consistent to that framework. And this is the whole reason behind CloudCasa, where we built it as a software as a service. So we like to say it's built in Kubernetes for Kubernetes. And what we've simply done is we've built an application. We've hosted this in AWS, and we also have servers within Azure as well. But from a server standpoint, you're going to be deploying agents out there in your on-prem Kubernetes clusters. You're going to be scanning in your cloud accounts like AKS, right? And your persistent volume storage, the storage associated with that. And you're going to be protecting those clusters, all being controlled by this CloudCasa server. As we've moved along the path of CloudCasa, we've developed a bring your own storage model. So if you want to, back up to your own storage, let's say Azure Blob Storage in the cloud, you can redirect those backups there. But really, the point of this migration story, or where this migration story started coming into play, was as we started developing newer technologies to restore the backup data, the persistent volume data that we were backing up. So we were able to do cross-cluster restores. We developed where if you had another cluster out there in the cloud or on-prem, we can restore to that separate cluster your application. But we developed a technology stack called full stack recovery, which is our ability to create a cluster for you on the fly. And that was the basis behind this migration story from Ubuntu to Azure Linux, or even from any cloud or on-prem device to AKS, like so that's a part of a migration. Let's say if you are running your applications on-prem, you want to shift it up to the cloud because of their integration into the cloud. We can move those applications and services very easily, and supporting the the Microsoft migration story was just, hey, what is Microsoft wanting to do with these clusters, right? So in their use case was, I want my customers to migrate from Ubuntu to Azure, but if you're running any on-prem cluster or any Kubernetes cluster in general, you can migrate over to Azure or AKS, and it's just an easy button at that point.
Martin, you touched upon the recovery aspect, but aside from that, are there any like other palpable benefits of choosing CloudCasa during that process of migration to Azure Linux? Does it come down to, I don't know, data integrity? Does it come down to cost savings or or are there any other aspects on the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the above, right? I think it's the fact that you can do it and you can do it easily,
Mhm.
right? Because I think the tools that are out there within the landscape today are, not taking into account the specific point in time, or they might just be uh, building the cluster, but not there's additional work that needs to be done for maintaining persistent volumes or databases that are being hosted, right? So it's really that key of thinking of this as a backup and restore, which can convert to migration, right? And by the way, there is some things that we are doing in the back end too to combine this all into one, right? So right
Mhm.
today it's a backup and restore in our world, but because this migration story is
Right.
becoming so popular now, I just want to be able to click a button, hey, click this button called migrate, and now I'm doing a backup restore in one single flow. And when all is said and done, after I'm done clicking the button, I have a new cluster in AKS. That is that's a story that we're trying to tell from
Right.
an easy button perspective. But I mean, so you mentioned challenges with doing this. As far as I'm aware, that we we're kind of the only ones out there that are doing it in this manner or in this way. I think that there's a lot of tools that are out there that can, you know, create your clustering, automate the creation of your environment. But as we start, coming into some of the details with respect to, well, what if I have you know, uh, edge devices that are out there. Like, how do you
Mhm.
handle something that can't connect to the internet? How do I download an application that doesn't have access to my container registry, right? So that these types of you know details and intricacies that go into deploying your cloud native application is what we're constantly thinking about in the back end, and we we truly want to be that simple, easy button to where you click a button and you
Mhm.
now have a cluster. You now have a new cluster with your deployed application, along with all your persistent volume data. So there's no need to recover from snapshots or do any finagling of mounting and connecting persistent volumes from other back means of backup. So it's just all one button to us.
Right. Let me circle back to one thing that you said like a minute ago about the migration story, right? For a long time, we were all about backup and recovery, but you said that migration has become a huge thing recently. Do you know why?
I just think that people are looking to save on costs and infrastructure,
Hmm.
right? There are tons of managed services out there that you can provide you with those five nines of uptime and availability. And when you can deploy,
Hmm.
a cluster for pennies on the dollar in Microsoft, like why manage, the uh, your on-prem infrastructure and your Kubernetes clusters and the cooling and the power costs associated with that, right? A lot of folks
Right.
that are now building their applications on-prem do so as hey, I'm developing this application, but part of Kubernetes and containerization is the fact that everything's portable, right? So it can reside anywhere at that point. And if I can guarantee the uptime of my application serviceability, it then becomes a no-brainer as to and save money while doing that. It then becomes a no-brainer in doing so. But I also want to make sure that I am protected. I mean, I have the uptime. I have maybe a replica set up, but if I wanted versioning and capturing previous persistent volume data, I actually wanted a backup, and uh, this is where products like CloudCasa can help facilitate that backup and recovery in addition to the migration story that we've been talking about. So
I've read somewhere that when you decide to move to some other tool or a different software, it's all about experiencing the aha moment, so-called aha moment. And I wonder what's that moment for uh, CloudCasa? What makes CloudCasa unique in managing the migration to Azure Linux? What would you say?
I think it's the ease of use, right? The simplicity of it all.
Hmm.
And I can probably show you some screenshots or just a quick setup here.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
How
Yeah.
you go about doing it. Yeah, let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to share up my screen here with Cloud Casa, but from a management and administration perspective, right? If any of you have ever dealt with, even the open source backup and recovery application Valera, right? This is something that is going to be a challenge from uh, not just the setup, but ensuring backups are running. Um, and even performing restores. Does my new cluster have access to the backup storage location? Are all the links there? Do I even have access to the cluster, right? So Valero requires an admin access, right? In the case of Cloud Cost, when you have like a multi-cluster manager with doing this, it really is this easy button, right? And I think those of you on the phone will appreciate if you've ever done this type of migration or even a persistent volume that requires persistent volume migration. In our world, it's just defining your cluster, right? So you're going to add your cluster here from our UI. You can log in, sign up for an account, but add your cluster. We can even manage clusters with Valero installed, but give it a name here, and it's just going to spit out an installation file, a manifest file that you can use kubectl apply to deploy our agent. And from there, it's just a matter of performing a backup of the cluster. And whoops, I accidentally closed that. So this is the website that you go to here to sign in and add and register your cluster. But here I have a backup that I've defined and run. You can see it's just backing up the resource data for the cluster, right? So all your pods, deployments, config maps, etc. We're going to back up those resources, copy the persistent volumes over to our storage, our cloud object storage, or to your own cloud object storage, right? And once our backup is defined, to define a restore, let's say you want to migrate this data, we have a catalog of all the recovery points that we backed up, right? So you choose your point in time, you choose your namespace that you want to restore, or you can restore the entire cluster and all the namespaces within. In this case, I'm only interested in a single namespace here. I can filter that down even by labels and the types of resources that I wanted to restore from a restore perspective here. But this is the cool part, right? This is the any to cloud recovery, or the full stack, we call it full stack recovery. We can actually create a new cluster for you on the fly. So if I want to create a new cluster in AKS, or in EKS or GK, right? Just like those clusters here. I have a Microsoft, my Azure account scanned in here. I can just choose that to build my new cluster in, and then provide it with a cluster name. I'll just call it test restore, right? And then because I've scanned in my Azure cloud account, it's going to filter out all the properties of that cloud account. So if I want to select a resource group, a region that I want to restore to. This is just like me building a cluster in Azure, right? So this is pulling directly from Microsoft here. All the different Kubernetes versions that I want to deploy this cluster with. So let's say I was doing testing, I want to just ensure that my application is going to run in the latest version of Kubernetes, just select that version, provide some client access and secret key that I can use to connect to Microsoft to build the cluster, and then I can customize my cluster, select networking. But in this screen here is where we can actually define kind of how we want our cluster to be built, right? So Microsoft provides two distributions of Linux, right? Ubuntu and Azure Linux. They're trying to, incentivize people to move over to Azure. Well, how do you do that easily, right? Log into CloudCasa, run a backup, run a restore, create a new cluster using Azure Linux. And here you can size up your cluster. So these are just all the VM sizes, and within the node pool, define how large you want your node pool to be. So it's just it's like you're defining a new cluster within Microsoft, but
Right.
at the same time, you're running a restore of your application, right? So another piece of this is, the source I had actually backed up from a DigitalOcean Kubernetes cluster, or a cluster that I created within DigitalOcean. I can transform, the storage classes of my application, or the storage class that my original application was using, over to something that's more compatible with Microsoft. So if this was DO block storage, I can select the equivalent, default storage class for Azure, which is, managed CSI, or now they have Azure Container Storage, right? So this umbrella behind all the storage classes so it's taking out a lot of the guesswork from a migration perspective, but give my restore job a name, run it, and click the restore button, and it's going to run that restore. I'm not actually going to run it because it's going to take some time, but I do have a restore job already created and that I ran yesterday here. But you can see the steps that it's going through from a migration perspective. Technically, it's a restore, but combine the backup with restore, you're essentially migrating your cluster over to Azure, where we create the
Mm-hmm.
cluster for you. Once the cluster is created, we go ahead and redeploy all your applications, install the CloudCasa agent, and then once all is said and done, you're going to have your application. You're going to be able to test your application running in AKS with the parameters that you define within your store job. So that's.
But let's say that you are getting started to embark on a migration process. Are there any steps that you should undertake before you start the process? Steps that, well, are must-haves in that respect, or steps that you think they should take, something that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, it really is the easy button, right? So in our world, I mean, there are no additional steps that I could think of that they would want to
Right.
perform, other than, signing up for a Cloud Casa account and running a backup of their cluster. Because once we have the
Mm-hmm.
backup, right, um, we're going to be able to run it and transform the restore to the cloud account that you would like. So, I mean, this isn't just a Ubuntu to Azure story. This is, an on-prem to cloud story. This is, between cloud accounts, right? So there is no, um, uh, you know, it is designed for that level of portability. And if you, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
you know, want to stop running within a specific region and you want to perform something else in a different cloud account because of cost savings or what have you, or you want to back up to a different object storage because of the same, it's very easy to do from this perspective. So there's not much groundwork that a user needs to take advantage of other than ensuring that they have, if they do have a cloud account that they want to migrate to, or you know the, that they actually have a functional cluster that they can install the Cloud Casa agent on, because that's what it all boils down to. Can we take a backup? Because once we can take a backup, then we open up the world in terms of migration and recovery from that point.
You know what? After your explanation, I do believe that CloudCasa is indeed an easy button in that respect. Martin, before we wrap up, I have a request to our guests. If you have any questions that you are afraid to ask today, or maybe there are some aspects, issues, areas that we forgot to tackle today, you can still talk directly afterwards with Martin Fan right after our webinar. Martin, could you please remind me of your contact details that we could share with our guests?
Yes, let me just post it in our presentation here. It is my, so I don't have it in this presentation. So you can just email mfan@calogicsoftware.com. My Twitter handle is also, I'll post up here, Martin G. Fan. And yeah, if so for those Microsoft folks on the phone, we are on the Microsoft partner portal there as well. There's some information and white papers that are out there as well, just describing our process and flow. So let me, I'm not sure if you have do you have a link for that? Probably have to dig up a link. 1 second. Linux Solutions Partner.
So take your time to find it. In the meantime, please note down Martin's details, and I believe that Martin has some best practices for maybe smoother transition from Ubuntu to Azure Linux that he is willing to share with you. So feel free to ask Martin anything in via email or via LinkedIn. That being said, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon on the next Ask Me Anything webinar for CloudCasa. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.